They say humans are fragile, that we're basically just hairless apes stumbling around hoping nothing bad ever happens to us. Well, for these 25 people, the opposite is true. When they got the memo that they were supposed to die, they completely ignored it. I'm talking about folks who survived bear attacks, nuclear disasters, and impossible situations so wild they rewrote the laws of physics to spit in death's face. They make superheroes look like quitters. After hearing what these people live through, your own problems may seem a little less dramatic. I'm Mike with List 25, and these are 25 survival stories that will inspire you. But before we begin, feel free to be inspired to like, share, comment, and click the notification bell, subscribe, do all that fun stuff. Really helps out the channel. Thank you guys so much. Let's go. 25. The Resilient Life of Sue Aikens. Most people freak out when they get a paper cut and see blood. But not Alaskan Wilderness Lodge owner Sue Aikens. This woman had to sew herself back together after being used as a chew toy by a grizzly bear. In 2007, Sue went out to collect water near her Kavik River camp when she was chased down by a massive grizzly. The bear didn't just knock her over and scare her. This was a full contact attack that truly should have killed her. During the mauling, her hips were dislocated, she suffered several head wounds, and injuries that should have sent her to the ER. Well, Sue didn't really have that option. Instead, she took care of herself. She got herself up, dragged herself home, and patched herself up with whatever supplies she had on hand. She turned into her own wilderness surgeon, and over the course of 10 days, she was alone in her cabin, praying for rescue and doing everything she could to stay alive. The truly wild part is that after all of this, she wasn't about to be chased out of her life. After she finally healed from this ordeal, she went right back to her remote camp like nothing happened. I mean, can you imagine? That is a whole new level of determination. 24. A Cuban hidden in landing gear. While most teens sneak out to go partying, 17-year-old Armando Socaras Ramirez snuck into the wheel well of a Douglas DC-8 airliner and stayed there for an entire 8-hour flight from Cuba to Madrid. This teenage rebellion death wish was quite the stunt, and quite the feat. It was 1969 when Ramirez decided to make a break for it from Cuba. With a few options for escape, he squeezed himself into the airplane's landing gear. Was it a good choice? No, of course not. It's one of the most hostile environments anyone could choose. I mean, they're designed for equipment, not people. Especially not people who would be 35,000 feet in the air. Once the journey began, Ramirez was in trouble. The temperature plummeted to negative 60 degrees Celsius, and the oxygen was so thin that breathing became a luxury. He fell unconscious, was frostbitten, lost all feeling in his hands and feet, and was suffering from hypothermia and hypoxia, all while fighting death. Yet somehow, this teen held on long enough to make it through the journey. Once on the ground, he crawled out of that wheel well half alive, half dead, and all the way a stowaway who beat all the odds. 23. Supersonic Survivor. Getting fired from your job can be rough. Getting fired from your jet while flying at the speed of sound is a whole different level of having a bad day on the job. U.S. Air Force pilot Brian Udell found that out while soaring through the sky at supersonic speeds. He was screaming through the heavens in an F-15 fighter jet on April 18, 1995, when everything went wrong. The plane swiftly fell from 24,000 feet to 17,000, and he had seconds, and I mean seconds, to choose his destiny. Things were going so catastrophically wrong that he had to punch out. He hit the eject button and risked it all to try and save himself as the aircraft spun out of control at Mach 1. Being thrown out of a craft at that height and at those speeds was a risk. The force of the ejection alone was absolutely insane. The impact of hitting the air dislocated both his elbows, and he suffered countless other injuries. He slammed into the ocean so hard, his life preserver was shredded on impact. Thankfully, he was able to inflate his raft and pull himself out of the water. He was lucky to be alive, and when he called for rescue, everyone was absolutely shocked he made it. Surprisingly, Udall defied all odds and walked away in one piece. 22. The Man Without a Heartbeat. Most people panic when their phone's battery dies. Howard Schnitzer somehow made it through his heart's choice to take a coffee break of 96 minutes. This 54-year-old effectively rewrote the rules of life by spending over an hour and a half in a death-like state. In medical parlance, Schnitzer's 2011 experience is referred to as sudden cardiac arrest, which means your heart just quits without giving you its 2 weeks notice. You may have a few minutes left after your heart stops beating before your brain shuts down like a computer running out of power. After that, you're typically looking at a very permanent kind of sleep. The most ludicrous part of Schnitzer's case is that his cardiac arrest didn't happen in a hospital with expensive equipment and medical personnel. Cardiopulmonary resuscitation was not being administered to him. His heart just stopped, and everyone assumed that that was the end of his story. He was declared clinically dead after 96 minutes of showing no sign of life, blood flow, or heartbeat. Then, as if death hadn't read the instruction manual, his heart simply started beating again all on its own. Doctors call this autoresuscitation the Lazarus phenomenon, which sounds far more amazing than it probably felt. The medical staff was at a loss because, well, people don't come back from the dead for more than like an hour. It's straightforward resuscitation with a medical explanation that nobody can really understand. 21. The Real Lord of the Flies. You know how some kids don't go to school and go to the, let's say, arcade instead, if you're in the 80s? Well, in 1965, 6 Tongan boys had another idea. They thought it'd be fun to take a small fishing boat for a ride. It's not a good idea. It's actually a bad choice. These kids were between 13 and 16, and they probably thought they were smart for borrowing that boat. Then the Pacific Ocean told them who was in charge. A storm came out of nowhere, ripped their sail to shreds, and basically said goodbye to their rudder. Their little trip turned into 8 days of floating around, wondering if they were going to die. But then they saw this small island called Ata. It's just a little rocky spot with nothing on it. And this is where the story gets crazy. What these boys did next was nothing like what you'd expect from teens stuck on an island. They didn't act like the kids in Lord of the Flies and try to kill each other. They did something most adults couldn't do. They got themselves together. They learned how to divide the work, catch fish, and grow food. One kid even broke his leg, but instead of leaving him behind, they took care of him until he got better. These boys made gardens. They turned nothing into a gym. They even made badminton court because it seems being stuck wasn't going to stop them from working out. When they fought, they would calm down and talk things over like adults. They lived off of whatever they could find for more than a year, like seabirds, coconuts, and wild plants. They hollowed out tree trunks to collect rainwater. Finally, an Australian fisherman named Peter Warner saw smoke from their cooking fire and came to their aid. They went home as heroes, and they really did deserve it. 20. The Amazing Story of Bill Weaver. I'm sorry, you think your commute to work in the morning is hard? Well, try having your office literally blow up while you're going over 2,400 miles an hour. In 1966, test pilot Bill Weaver went through the same thing, and somehow he lived to tell people about it over coffee. You see, Weaver was flying an SR-71 Blackbird, which is the fastest thing with wings that people have ever made. He was going about 78,000 feet up and Mach 3.2 when things went wrong. No warning, no time to think. The plane was going so fast that it was starting to break apart. One moment, he's in the cockpit of the most advanced spy plane in the world. The next, he's being pulled out of it by forces that would make a tornado look weak. The violent breakup knocked him out right away. His body couldn't handle the sudden drop in pressure and the crazy weather up there. But this is where things get strange. He was already floating under his parachute when he awoke. His pressure suit had kept him alive while he was unconscious, and somehow his parachute had opened on its own after he got away from the plane. It's crazy to think about what he went through, that he only got hurt a little when he landed. Jim Zwyer, the man who was his co-pilot, wasn't so lucky. the same things that Weaver somehow lived through, killed Zoyer. When things go wrong at these speeds, it really shows you how fine the line is between walking away and not. 19. A Real-Life Castaway. This next story is, well and truly a shocker. Jose Salvador Alvarenga spent over 14 months floating around the Pacific Ocean, eating raw fish and drinking turtle blood. That's longer than some people spend in college, just to put it in perspective. In November 2012, Alvarenga set out on what was supposed to be a short fishing trip off the coast of Mexico. He was with a friend, and they probably thought they would be home in time for dinner. Then a storm came and basically made fun of their plans. It broke their boat, sent them way off course, and left them floating in the middle of nowhere with no engine, navigation gear, nor any way to call for help. His friend died after refusing to eat the raw food they could catch. Alvarenga was alone on a small boat in the endless Pacific. Take a moment to think about that. You can't see any land, any other boats, or even know where you are or if anyone is looking for you. The man lived by catching anything he could find: seabirds, turtles, and fish. He drank turtle blood when he couldn't find any rainwater. He would sometimes eat the fish right there, and when he could, he would put food in the boat's small icebox. The mental part was probably worse than the physical part. He talked to himself, prayed a lot, and somehow kept hoping that someone would find him. He finally washed up in the Marshall Islands in January 2014 after drifting for 438 days and covering thousands of miles. The locals found this guy, who was completely worn out, skinny, and had a beard. He had just survived the longest time anyone had ever been lost at sea. That's not just staying alive. That's changing what the body and mind can handle. 18. The woman who survived an elevator fall. When you have a bad day at work, you might spill your coffee or deal with a rude customer. Betty Lou Oliver had a terrible day in July 1945. A bomber crashed into her building, and then she fell 75 floors in an elevator. Life threw everything it had at her when she was 20 and working as an elevator operator in the Empire State Building. The pilot of a U.S. Army B-25 bomber flew through thick fog and played a deadly game of hide-and-seek with the tallest building in Manhattan. The plane hit the north side of the skyscraper between the 78th and 80th floors. The crash caused a huge explosion and a fire that killed 14 people instantly. The first explosion hurt Oliver badly, but she was alive, which is more than many people could say. Rescuers thought putting her in an elevator would get her down quickly. It seemed like a good idea, but the crash had caused more damage than they thought. The cables holding the elevator were broken, but no one knew how bad it was until it was too late. The cables broke once the elevator started to go down. Oliver fell freely for almost 75 stories. Think about it. She fell through 75 floors of empty space, probably wondering if this was really how her Tuesday was going to end. But then something strange happened. The coiled cables that had fallen to the bottom of the elevator shaft worked like the most expensive crash pad in the world. They took enough of the blow that she survived by hitting bottom. She had broken bones, burns, and everything else you'd expect from a bad accident, but she was breathing. She recovered after spending months in the hospital. That same day, that woman survived a plane crash and a fall from a 75-story building. Some people just don't seem to die. 17. Self-inflicted C-Section. People often complain about traffic or their boss when they have a really bad day. Inez Ramirez Perez had a day when she had to do surgery on herself with a kitchen knife. This 40-year-old mother from a small village in Mexico did something that had never been done before in March 2000. She gave herself a cesarean section, and both she and the baby lived. Ramirez lived in the southern part of Mexico, far from any hospitals or doctors. Things started to go wrong pretty quickly when she went into labor. She knew she was in big trouble after more than 12 hours of labor and no baby. There was no cell phone, no car, and no medical help nearby. It was just her, a baby that was stuck, and the very real chance that they were both going to die. So, she made a choice that most people couldn't even think about, let alone do. She took a knife from the kitchen and a bottle of alcohol. The alcohol was meant to give her courage, not to put her to sleep. Then she lay down and began to cut into her own stomach. Think about how desperate and determined you would have to be to do that. She somehow opened her womb, got her baby boy out alive, and stayed awake long enough to call for help. Her neighbors found her and took her to a small clinic. Doctors there couldn't believe what they saw. The mother and child were both alive. They gave her medicine for the infection, sewed her wound, and she recovered. Her son also grew up healthy. It's hard to picture what kind of mix of maternal instinct, desperation, and sheer toughness would make someone do something like this. A lot of people pass out when they get a flu shot, but this woman did major surgery on herself to save her own child's life. 16. Samuel Whittemore. Most 78-year-olds complain about their arthritis. Samuel Whittemore took his musket, a few dueling pistols, and a sword, and went looking for British soldiers. On April 19, 1775, this farmer in Mattocks, Massachusetts, decided he wasn't too old to join the Revolutionary War party that was happening right in his own backyard. Whittemore had already fought in other wars, so he knew what he was getting into. He saw British troops leaving Lexington and Concord and hid behind a stone wall to wait. Then he shot, killing at least one soldier and injuring several others. Not bad for a guy who was probably older than most people's great-grandfathers. The British, on the other hand, weren't going to let an old farmer shoot at them from behind a wall. They quickly turned on him. A musket ball hit him in the face from close range, and, well, that should have been the end of the story. But apparently, no one told the British soldiers that one shot was enough, because they then stabbed him at least 13 times with the bayonet and left him bleeding in the dirt. The local militia thought they were looking at a dead body when they found him. Doctors caring for him didn't think he would live. Whittemore, on the other hand, had different plans. He not only lived, but did so for another 18 years to the age of 96, which was very impressive for anyone back then, let alone someone who'd been shot at by a whole British unit. Today, he is officially known as the oldest person who fought in the Revolutionary War. The man became a legend not by acting his age. This man became a legend by not acting his age when his country needed him. 15. The Titanic survivor who won Olympic gold. You'd think that living through the sinking of the Titanic is the greatest thing you'd do in your life. For most people who lived through it, it was. But not for this next guy. Richard Norris Williams thought that it was just the beginning. This tennis player not only survived one of the worst disasters in history, but also turned his near-death experience into an Olympic gold medal. In 1912, Williams was on the Titanic when it hit an iceberg. He spent hours floating in the freezing North Atlantic, which is about as pleasant as it sounds. When rescuers got him out, his legs were so badly frostbitten that the ship's doctor said right away that they should be cut off. Just cut them off and be done with it. Williams looked at the doctors and said, "Thanks, but no thanks." He chose to walk his way back to health instead of letting them cut off his legs. He walked around a lot while he was recovering to get the blood flowing in his frozen limbs again. This probably wasn't the most comfortable rehab program anyone's ever tried, but it worked. Williams not only healed his legs, but he also went on to have a tennis career that most athletes would kill for. He won the US National Tennis Championships twice, the Wimbledon doubles title in 1920, and then, to top it all off, a gold medal at the 1924 Paris Olympics. So, just to recap, he lived through the Titanic, refused to let doctors cut off his frostbitten legs, walked himself back to health, and then won an Olympic gold medal. That's not just getting through a disaster, that's using it to become famous. 14. Odin the Dog. When it storms, most dogs hide under the bed. Like my dog Picasso, you have to get him his thunder shirt. Odin the Great Pyrenees saw a huge fire and thought his goats needed a bodyguard. This dog basically wrote the book on being loyal and stubborn during the 2017 Tubbs fire in California. Odin's family had to leave Cali quickly when the Tubbs fire started to spread. They asked him to come with them, but when Odin saw his flock of goats, he basically said, "Nope, I'm staying put." Odin took his job as a livestock guardian very seriously, which is what Great Pyrenees are bred to do. His family drove away to safety, probably thinking they'd never see their dog again, but Odin stayed behind with the goats while the fire raged around them. The Tubbs fire was one of the worst wildfires in California history at the time. When his family finally got back after the fire, they thought they would only find ash and sadness. What they found was Odin and all his goats alive and well. But that wasn't even the best part. This dog also somehow kept a group of orphaned deer safe while they were staying with the flock during the fire. Odin was running a wildfire refugee camp for farm animals and deer while most animals were running for their lives. They wrote a children's book about him called Odin, Dog Hero of the Fires, because his story was so amazing. Some dogs bring back sticks. To protect his family, Odin chose to fight nature itself. 13. The soldier who survived execution. A lot of people are afraid of getting bad performance reviews at work. In 1915, Wenceslao Moguel got the ultimate pink slip when the Mexican government decided that his revolutionary activities deserved a firing squad. They didn't expect Moguel to refuse to die. During the Mexican Revolution, being caught as a revolutionary meant almost certain death. Moguel learned this the hard way when government troops caught him and quickly sentenced him to death. There was no long trial nor appeals process. He was just supposed to die by firing squad on a certain date. They lined him up with the other men who were going to die and shot him. He was hit by several bullets, which should have been enough to kill him. But the firing squad wanted to be 100% sure, so an officer walked up and gave the traditional coup de grace, a shot to the head at point-blank range. But Moguel had other ideas. He woke up hours later, lying there bleeding among the dead bodies. After being shot several times and in the head at close range, the man woke up in a pile of bodies. He was able to crawl away from what was supposed to be his grave. He recovered, but he had scars for the rest of his life, including a bullet wound on his face that was really noticeable. People began to call him El Fusilado, which means the executed one. It's actually probably the coolest nickname anyone's ever gotten. He actually lived through his own execution and told people about it for decades after. 12. Girl survives wilderness ordeal with loyal dog. 3-year-olds can't go a day without their favorite snacks and cartoons. Karina Chikitova lived in the wilds of Siberia for 11 days with only her dog Nida, wild berries, and river water. In 2014, Karina left her remote village in the Sakha Republic and got completely lost in one of the harshest places on Earth. You see, the Siberian wilderness isn't a great place for toddlers. I'm talking about a place where temperatures drop quickly, predators are always on the lookout for easy meals, and most adults wouldn't last a week without the right gear. But Karina had something that most survival experts don't. A loyal dog who seemed to know that keeping a 3-year-old alive was now her full-time job. Nida kept Karina warm at night, which probably saved her life right there. The dog also kept her safe from any predators that might have been nearby. A small child alone in the woods is basically a walking ad for every hungry animal in the area. Meanwhile, Karina lived on wild berries and water from rivers. Nida decided to go back to the village after being gone for over a week, but this dog never left the kid behind. But that was one of the best things either of them could have done. The search teams knew something was wrong when Nida came without Karina. The dog then took the rescuers back to the spot where she had left her. They found the little girl alive but weak, which is pretty amazing considering what she'd been through. A statue at Yakutsk airport now honors this story of survival. After 11 days in the wilds of Siberia, most people would need therapy. Karina had her dog, some berries, and what seemed to be nerves of steel. 11. Highest body temperature. When the thermostat reaches 75, people start to complain. Willie Jones's body temperature got up to 115, and he lived to tell the tale. This 52-year-old man was working outside on a hot summer day on July 10, 1980, when his internal temperature gauge broke. Jones fainted from heat exhaustion while working in the hot weather. When paramedics got to him, he was barely awake and his body temperature had reached 115 degrees Fahrenheit. Normal body temperature is around 98.6, and anything over 106 is usually thought to be life-threatening. Jones was running almost 10 degrees hotter than that. At that temperature, your organs start to fail, and your brain is basically cooking inside your head. The human body isn't meant to work like a walking oven, and most people don't live when their internal temperature gets that high. But Jones wasn't ready to go yet. When he reached the hospital, doctors immediately started aggressive cooling measures. They used ice baths, cooling blankets, and IV fluids to try to lower his temperature before his organs completely failed. It was a race to cool him down before the heat hurt his brain for good or killed him. And somehow, it worked. Jones not only lived, but he made a full recovery. He did have some temporary confusion and tiredness, which makes sense seeing as how his body had just been going through something like a medical heat wave. His body temperature was still one of the highest ever recorded for a person who survived heat stroke. The man basically turned into a furnace and then walked away. 10. The Dwarves of Auschwitz. The Auschwitz family was a Hungarian Jewish family of performers who traveled with a circus. 7 of them were dwarves. In 1944, they were put on a train to Auschwitz, which was basically a death sentence for most people, especially those the Nazis thought were different or unfit. People didn't often survive Auschwitz. The Nazis had made killing into a business, and anyone who was thought to be abnormal in any way was usually killed as soon as they got there. There was a lot working against the Auschwitz family. According to Nazi beliefs, they were all good candidates for immediate death. It was probably a mix of things that no one could have predicted or planned for that kept them alive. And yes, every single member of the family survived. It sounds horrible, but the camp doctors wanted to use them for medical experiments. Ironically, this may have kept them alive longer than other prisoners. They were also very strong and stayed together as a family throughout their entire time at the prison. The family returned to Hungary after being freed, and they eventually moved to another country to start over. 9. The Skydiver saved by fire ants. Joan Murray was skydiving when her parachute decided to take the day off. She fell 14,500 feet towards what should have been a very messy end. Instead, she fell in a pile of fire ants and lived to tell about it. Murray was falling about 80 miles an hour, which is about the speed at which survival becomes less of a choice and more of a suggestion. Her parachute didn't open correctly, and gravity was doing what it does best. In this situation, most people would be thinking about their choices in life and probably saying their last prayers. But it seems that fate has a sick sense of humor. Murray didn't land on solid ground. Instead, she landed right on top of a fire ant pile. Landing on a pile of angry fire ants would normally be seen as adding insult to injury, but things were not normal. The ants got right to work, swarming all over her and biting and stinging her hundreds of times. In most cases, this would be a nightmare. But the major pain from all those ant bites gave her such an intense rush of adrenaline that it kept her heart beating and her body responsive, even though it was very traumatic. The ant mound also helped break her fall, which probably kept her from getting hurt even worse. She got stung multiple times, bruised, and had some small fractures, but she lived. Yes, fire ants, the bugs that most people scream and run away from, literally saved her life by being their usual aggressive selves. That's not just staying alive. That's winning the lottery with the world's most painful ticket. 8. The real Crocodile Dundee. In 1977, Rod Ansell was hunting cattle in Australia's Northern Territory when his boat flipped over and left him stuck in the middle of nowhere with almost no supplies. You can't just walk to the nearest gas station in the Australian outback to get help. I'm talking about one of the most dangerous and isolated places on Earth, where everything wants to kill you, and the closest civilization might as well be on another continent. Ansell was alone out there for 56 days, which is almost 2 months of trying not to die in a place that's known for killing people. He made it through using all the bushcraft skills he had learned. He had to catch fish, hunt small animals, and find plants he could eat without getting sick. At the same time, he had to be on the lookout for crocodiles and snakes that might see him as a threat or a meal. He made tools and shelters out of whatever he could find, which is pretty much how he survived. After almost 2 months, rescuers finally found him. He was skin and bones, but he was alive. His story got a lot of attention around the world and was the basis for Crocodile Dundee. The difference is that Paul Hogan's character was funny and charming, but the real Rod Ansel spent almost 8 weeks wondering if each day would be his last. The movie made living in the outback seem exciting and romantic. In reality, he was hungry, alone, and always looking over his shoulder for things that could kill him for 56 days. That story was definitely cleaned up a lot by Hollywood. 7. Captain Mattocks and the nuclear bomb. Aviation experts said Adam Mattocks couldn't do what he did, bail out of a B-52 bomber without an ejection seat and live to tell about it. But he did. His plane had a major failure during a test flight that turned his cockpit into a flying death trap. It's not easy to get out of a B-52. Most military planes have ejection seats because it's thought that jumping out of a plane on your own is a suicide mission. But Mattocks was in a situation where staying put would have meant certain death, and jumping out would have meant likely death. He chose to try the impossible in a split second. He didn't go down with the plane. Instead, he left the cockpit by hand while it was still in the air. Consider how precise and on time you need to be. He knew that if he made a mistake or was even a second too early or too late, the plane or the wind would have ripped him apart. He was able to get out of the plane, open his parachute, and survive the fall from several thousand feet. It's hard to believe, but he only hurt himself a little when he hit the ground. Aviation experts still think his escape was one of a kind in aviation history because no one else has ever successfully bailed out of a B-52 without an ejection seat. When your only choices are certain death or probable death, Mattocks basically rewrote the book on what people can do. He chose likely death, and somehow made it work. 6. The inspiration for Robinson Crusoe. We've got the guy who basically came up with the best "I told you so" moment ever. In 1704, Alexander Selkirk, an officer in the Scottish Royal Navy, and his captain got into a fight about whether their ship was going to sink. He didn't want to stay on board to find out, so he asked to be dropped off on a deserted island in the South Pacific. Brave choice. Selkirk was all by himself on the Juan Fernandez Islands off the coast of Chile with only the supplies he could carry. He was in the middle of the ocean with no plan for how to get help and no idea when someone would pick him up. Within 6 hours, most people would have been begging to get back on that ship that didn't seem safe. Selkirk, on the other hand, decided to make the most of his situation. He lived like the first extreme survivalist in the world for 4 years. He hunted goats, caught fish, and learned which plants were safe to eat. He used animal skins to make clothes and wood to build shelters. In short, he learned to do everything by himself, while most people in civilization couldn't even make their own bread. In 1709, an English ship finally picked him up. He was very thin, but still alive. Daniel Defoe used his story as the basis for Robinson Crusoe, which is now one of the most famous adventure novels ever written. Selkirk showed that sometimes the crazy choice to leave a sinking ship and take care of yourself on a deserted island works out. Though it probably wasn't the best part of the experience to talk to yourself for 4 years. 5. Surviving one of the highest known radiation doses. A lot of people are worried about getting too many x-rays at the dentist. Albert Stevens was given plutonium and lived to be 79 years old. Stevens, who had no idea what was going on, became part of one of the most extreme human experiments in history in 1945 when doctors secretly injected him with radioactive material as part of the Manhattan Project research. When they gave him that shot, they didn't ask permission or even tell them what they were going to do. They put 131 kilobecquerels of plutonium into his body, making him a walking radiation test. Stevens was exposed to 64 sieverts of radiation over the next 21 years, which is the highest dose ever recorded for a person. Most people think much smaller doses are fatal. Most people who would be exposed to that much radiation would die within weeks or months. Stevens, on the other hand, kept living. He lived his life as usual, probably never even realizing that he was carrying enough radioactive material to kill most people many times over. He eventually passed away at the age of 79 from causes that had nothing to do with the research, which left the scientists who were studying him completely puzzled. His case showed that the human body can sometimes handle things that shouldn't be possible to survive. 4. A survivor of Chernobyl. Alexander Yevchenko's job site literally exploded with nuclear radiation, but he survived to tell the tale. This communications officer was at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in April 1986 when Reactor 4 decided to have the worst day ever at the worst time. Yevchenko was right there when the reactor blew, which means he shouldn't have lived through what happened next. The blast sent him into an area with radiation levels that would kill most people very quickly. He started to show all the terrible signs of acute radiation sickness right away, like severe nausea, burns, hair loss, and damage to his internal organs. Many people died within hours of the explosion, but Yevchenko managed to stay alive. They took him to a hospital in Moscow right away, where doctors worked for months to keep him alive and treat the deadly effects of all that radiation exposure. It was amazing that he lived through those first few hours, but he really did get better. His survival was very important for figuring out what really happened inside the plant during the disaster. His story helped scientists and historians figure out what happened to the people right after the explosion because he was one of the few who saw it up close and lived. Yevchenko lived for many years after that, but the radiation damaged his health for good. Even if you're next to an exploding nuclear reactor, being in the wrong place at the wrong time can still work out. 3. Artimus Pyle. Artimus Pyle, the drummer for Lynyrd Skynyrd, survived 2 attempts on his life in the same day. Neither of them was his fault. In October 1977, the band's plane went down in a wooded area of Mississippi, killing some members right away. Pyle was badly hurt, with broken ribs, cuts, and shock, but somehow he was still breathing in the wreckage. Most people would have stayed where they were and waited for help, but Pyle didn't want to die in the middle of a forest. He walked for miles through the woods to get help, even though he was hurt. He probably thought his troubles were over when he finally got to a house. He was wrong. The homeowner saw this bloody, long-haired man staggering toward their door and thought he was an intruder. Then, they shot him. Take a moment to think about that. Pyle's bandmates died in a plane crash. He walked for miles through the woods with broken ribs. Then he was shot by the person he was asking for help. Most people would question their life choices or their luck on a day like that, but Pyle also survived the shooting. Eventually he was saved, taken to the hospital, and healed completely. His story is one of the most amazing examples of how one person can have multiple life-threatening events happen to them in a single day. Some people are just too stubborn to let death win, even when it tries twice. 2. Bad Luck Lydia. Thor Christensen shot Lydia Preston in the head, which should have been the end of her story. Instead, it was just the beginning. Most of the time, getting shot in the head means death. You see, bullets in the human brain don't really mix, and most people who do don't really get a chance to complain about it later. But Preston's body had other ideas. She lived through both the physical pain of being shot and the mental fear of being attacked by someone who had killed other people. She lived thanks to the work of emergency medical teams, and she even healed from injuries that would have killed almost anyone else. It's amazing that she survived an attack by a serial killer, but surviving a shot to the head is something else entirely. People often bring up her case when they talk about people who survive violent attacks against all odds, and for good reason. In most cases, victims of serial killers don't get to tell their stories. Preston not only lived, but she also showed how strong the human body and spirit can be when everything is against them. 1. The first man to set foot on Normandy beach. Leonard Max Schroeder was the first American soldier to set foot on the beaches on D-Day. This 20-year-old and the 1st Infantry Division landed on Omaha Beach on June 6, 1944. It was like volunteering to run into a meat grinder. Omaha Beach wasn't just any beach. It was one of the Germans' most heavily fortified positions. They had spent years turning it into a killing field with machine gun nests, artillery positions, and obstacles that were meant to stop Schroeder from doing what he was trying to do. Well, not Schroeder specifically, but you know what I mean. He got the full attention of every German weapon pointed at the water because he landed there first. Schroeder was shot at by a lot of guns, artillery, and things that had been put in the way to kill invading soldiers. He made it through those first few crucial moments when so many others died right away, thanks to training, bravery, and a lot of luck. Being the first person on the beach on D-Day wasn't a privilege, it was a death sentence that somehow didn't work. He didn't just make it through the landing, Schroeder fought through the whole Normandy campaign and survived the war. He later talked about his experiences to help people understand what it was really like to fight, probably because most people don't know what it's like to charge under machine gun fire at 20 years old. His story is the best proof that people can survive in some of the most dangerous conditions that modern warfare has ever seen. He is in a class by himself because he was the first person to walk on one of the most dangerous beaches in history, live to tell the tale. And there you have it. 25 people who faced death and told it to take a number and wait in line. These people show that even the most ordinary people can do amazing things when life pushes them to their limits. And if you enjoyed this list, you need to check out 25 people who died in the most WTF way possible if you want to check out some stories that are the complete opposite of this video. I'll put a link in the description below and somewhere over here shortly. But now it's time for my favorite part of any video. Trivia. I honestly can't wait to see how many people of you guessed the right answer without cheating. Just leave your answers in the comments. Which survival expert is famous for the quote, improvise, adapt, overcome, and has survived in some of the world's most extreme environments? Is it A, Bear Grylls, B, Les Stroud, C, Ray Mears, or D, Cody London? And that's it for today. But before you go, like I said before, like, share, comment, subscribe, notification bell, so you don't miss out on anything, and I'll catch you guys next time. See ya.